thank you to Stephen and Wendy who have joined us tonight, and also to those people listening later on with the recording. I'm Paul McLeish. I'm talking tonight with Julie Santee-Tomlinson, who is presenting along with myself. And our topic today is we're looking at writing for publication in the orthopaedic and trauma nursing arena. So Julie is the editor-in-chief. Is that your official title, Julie? Did I get that right?
Yes, something like that.
Editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Orthopaedic and Trauma Nursing, which is based, I guess, in the UK, but is the official journal for pretty much the majority of orthopaedic nursing associations throughout the world. There is another orthopaedic nursing journal in America, but this journal is probably represents almost the rest of the world. I would say, I guess that makes sense. Yeah. So I guess the concept of why we're talking about this is, well, actually, do you want to say hello first and introduce anything else about yourself, Julie, before I start raving on too much?
So just to say that Paul and I have been for some time discussing encouraging nurses in Australia and your part of the world to publish more, because until fairly recently, the number of applications that we have submitted from Australia has been quite small, just the odd one or two people who publish regularly. So one of the things that we're both working on together is encouraging certainly ANZONA members for sure to think about all of the different options that they've got for writing publications. So that's what we were planning to do today. A little bit more about me is that I'm an orthopaedic nurse, have been since probably the day before I qualified, and I work as a senior lecturer at the University of Hull, which is in the northeast of the UK.
Excellent. Oh, thank you for that. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. So tonight I want it to be pretty informal, and it's sort of more, we've got some slides here that will present some information, but more about just talking about why publishing so important, especially in our specialty as well. So we'll go through these slides and sort of just have a conversation as we go. And for Wendy and Stephen, feel free to ask questions via the chat function, and we can sort of go back and forth with that as well. So some of what we'll present today, Julie and I will also present at the ANZONA conference in Sydney later this year, because it's such I think it's really important topic, and it's something that can keep our specialty strong, and I think for us to develop as a specialty, these days when there's a little bit of pressure on the specialty in terms of is it really still a unique specialty that we should be focusing on, and I think it is, and I guess part of what we can achieve in advocating for that specialty is publication and talking about what we do. I think that's something that we struggle with as nurses, is to talk about what we do and why it's important, and let each other know what we're doing and why we're doing it, and what impact that's having on our patient care, if that makes sense. So, Julie, do you want to sort of start going through the slides, and we can sort of talk about each one as we go?
So if we go to the first slide.
So if there's underneath the slide, there's a next button, just right. Okay. Yep.
Got it.
There you go.
Okay. So this is just a quote from an author that I don't know actually, but I thought it was a kind of quite a motivating quote, if you like, really, from the point of view of there are lots of different people out there. There are those like myself, who was a beginner at some point 20 odd years ago, but managed to get a publication in a journal the first time back in when was it, 1994, and it's been a perpetual habit of mine ever since. So actually writing publications is a habit of mine. There are people at various stages in their careers from the point of view of their writing commitment, if you like, really, right down to those who believe that they would never be interested in writing anything for anybody else to read. And what we're trying to do very much with the ANZONA community is encourage people to think about there being lots of different ways that you might think about writing for publication. But the idea that, you know, everyone has something important and interesting to say, and there are lots of ways in which you can package those things and lots of ways in which you can get help to do that. And so the idea that there's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you is about getting you to think about those things that, you know, everyone's really got something very interesting to say, and that you really should be thinking about sharing that with the rest of the world, especially given the way media work these days. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that, Paul.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I think as nurses, or even, I mean, you know, as a human being, you feel like someone else has got the skills and they're doing things that are worthy of publication or worthy of talking about. There's not something that we do. It's, you know, what we do, that's just normal, and we, you know, plod along doing what we do, and that's okay. But I think there's a phenomenon where as you learn something, or you get engaged in a process, and you change your practice, and that becomes normal to you. Sometimes you don't fully appreciate the value of that, and not talking about that to other people, and not presenting that, and not publishing that means that, you know, no one else hears about that information. And I've always found it surprising sometimes when I start talking about a concept or something that I did in practice, and someone else says, "Oh, wow, that's really interesting." I think, "Oh, really?" It's just seemed normal to me. But I guess as you've gone along that path of developing that process, it sort of becomes a bit more normalised, and you don't appreciate the value of that, I guess, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And that's the point exactly, about making sure that you know that you can share that with people.
Yeah.
And I suppose the next thing to say is, in a way, this idea of writing for publication and by publication I mean that quite loosely, and we'll talk in a minute about what the variety of different ways people can think about writing things for other people to read, if you'd rather call it that than writing for publication. And I think there are 4 main reasons why nurses in particular have a responsibility for writing. And the first of those is about thinking and ordering your thoughts. The whole process of thinking about a publication, doing the background reading that goes with it, ordering your thoughts in a way that you can write them down so that other people can understand them, is about being a reflective practitioner. And people who are highly reflective write very well in terms of thinking about how that impacts on practice, and it is about thinking about practice being more effective. And then the second part is about the idea of sharing those thoughts and maybe even ideas and philosophies with others. So, for example, we were just very briefly in the chat talking to Stephen about what he's going to be presenting on at ANZONA, and we were just talking about the orthopaedics and palliative care, which is a very, very topical issue that hasn't really been explored, and the notion that there is a potential for a focus on palliative care in some aspects of orthopaedics would be quite new to some practitioners. And that's a perfect example of how thoughts and ideas and philosophies might be explored with others from that point of view, because there's a whole load of ethical issues that go behind all of that are just really well worth airing with us, if you like, really. The third idea is about, people have studied, it's standard practice really all over the world now for qualified nurses to be continuing to develop themselves through, oh, sorry, there's my phone going off, I do apologise. Let me turn that off.
Good ringtone.
Yeah, it's quite, okay, got it. Sorry about that. Yeah, so where was I? So people are doing lots of work investigating ideas by undertaking literature reviews, undertaking small research projects. And often people think, well, nobody wants to hear about what I'm doing. But it goes back to what Paul was just saying about, you mention something to people and they go, oh, that's a really good idea. We have the opportunity to share those ideas that come from things like reviews, research projects, even things like audit projects that really make a difference. And then the other thing that I think is about responsibility is about, and that's probably very different to the idea of thinking traditionally about the way in which we publish work, is about speaking to our patients. And hip fractures are a prime example of this. If you have a look around the internet for information for patients who have experienced hip fracture, and what their expectations might be of their recovery, for example, there's actually very little out there. There's some really good stuff that started coming out of the US recently about sharing information with patients about that. But other than that, there's very little out there, just as an example. And I think we have much more of a responsibility to have more in the way of online information for patients that's published by nurses who understand what it is that those patients need in terms of information and how that information is written. So really, for me, those are four big things that are good reasons for people to be writing about what it is that they're thinking, what it is that they're reading about, and what's happening in their own practice. Don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Paul.
No, I like the idea of speaking to your patients and for your patients, because I think sometimes that they're the group of people that are missed out in that story, and really, the whole idea and concept of us increasing our knowledge and our practice is for the benefit of our patients. So it's great to be able to include them in some of some of those aspects as well. So are we talking about where, it might be on the next slide, sorry, where we, here we go, where we publish. So it's not just about publishing in the journal, but there's lots of other opportunities to publish, and all of equal importance, I guess.
Absolutely. There isn't that publishing in a formal academic or nursing journal, even though that's a really good thing to do, and everything varies from publishing in a highly specialised journal like the International Journal of Orthopaedic and Trauma Nursing, but to something highly academic like the Journal of Advanced Nursing, to something that's a bit more local. We have the Nursing Standard in the UK, which is our main weekly nursing journal, and I'm sure you have something similar to that in Australia that might be the kind of place that you would write small opinion papers for, or you might write just a small piece seeking discussion with others, for example. So it's not always about just those publications that we think of being academic and informal journals from that point of view. So, for example, Facebook and all kinds of social media are very good places to be sharing ideas from that point of view. And no, I don't think in the orthopaedic community we're really using advantage, partly because people don't have very much time, and when they are using social media, it tends to be for more personal purposes. Certainly from my perspective, that's how I stay in touch with my friends and colleagues around the world. But I don't ever really think of it as being somewhere where I can share ideas. But of course, they're very well set up to do that. And places, organisations like ANZONA, ICON, the journal, for example, have Facebook pages that could be very much centred around having these discussions. And of course, those are other places where we might be able to share information for and with patients, and even maybe it be interacting in a useful way to them. And I do think that blogs might be but one option for this. So I've put up here an example of how one might start a blog, which you can very easily give patients access to the web link for, so that it becomes a kind of web page that offers them information. There are prime examples of how blogs have made a real difference, certainly from the point of view of patients sharing their experiences with other patients. I don't know if you've had the book, and I think it's a movie too now, called The C Word, out in Australia yet.
I don't know. Don't recognise that one. No, sorry.
There's a young woman in her early 30s who was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she wrote a very honest but quite entertaining and very funny blog about her experiences of being diagnosed with cancer. And at one point in the progress through this, she was told that her cancer had gone, everything was okay, she'd had surgery, she'd had chemotherapy, she'd come out the other side of it, and then not very long later she became terminally ill, and I think died in her mid-30s or something like that. And the book's now been, I think, turned into, so the blog became a book and the book became a movie, and it just very, very, I haven't read it myself, but apparently very, very powerful way of sharing information with others who were in a similar position.
Yeah.
And blogs are actually pretty easy to get up and running these days. And if somebody takes responsibility for them and making sure they're regularly updated, there's something interesting there for people to see. Actually, they're a lot easier to manage than our general web pages, which can be quite difficult to manage because we don't have quite the ease of using software.
Yeah,
and that is that perhaps people's opinions are. That blogs and web pages, I know nurses have to be careful professionally, but our opinions and the way that we see things are incredibly interesting and incredibly important in the way that we move practice forward.
Yeah, it's sort of the idea about opinion is interesting in the academic world. Often that's discounted as very low level evidence, and I think I'm not sure if it's Cochrane or the NHMRC here in Australia has actually taken opinion off as one of the hierarchies of evidence, unfortunately. But there's certain topics where there just isn't any other good, high quality, high level information, and there's real value in if you've got the right person who's got the right experience. It's worth listening to what they're saying. They know what they're talking about.
And having that discussion, so offering an opinion often highlights one person's views, but will often get a discussion going, sometimes over quite contentious topics, doesn't it?
Yeah, and presenting that stuff at conferences and education sessions. That's all. Yeah, that's another level and another form of starting that discussion, and then you get that back and forth, and there's real value in having that conversation, I think.
Absolutely.
All right, so we'll go. So there's some recommended readings on this topic. Did you want to say anything about those specifically?
No, just to say that those are two publications that I recommend to people. They're both, the first one's actually published in the International Journal of Orthopaedic and Trauma Nursing, so it's focused specifically on writing for publication, particularly for journal articles. The Holland and Watson book, which I think is an e-book, so people may have it via their libraries, is a very sort of like practical approach to all sorts of different kinds of publication. It's been updated relatively recently. Roger Watson, who's the second author on that, is a professor here, and I think Karen Holland is the editor of the Nurse Education in Practice journal. But there's quite a lot of stuff in that about the notion of publishing online, and that publication isn't only about journal papers. So I do recommend that quite highly, because it's written in quite an engaging and useful way without putting people off, if you like, really.
Okay, excellent. Oh, sorry, I'm doing the slides as well. Go too fast.
So one of the things that I always do when I'm talking to people about publication is raise the issue of rejection at the beginning, um, because I think one of the reasons that people choose not to publish or feel uncomfortable about the idea of it is that they're worried about rejection. And in this game, especially if you're thinking about publishing in an academic journal, unfortunately, the notion of rejection is a part of life. And anybody who's dipped their toe into the publishing world will tell you that at some point very quickly in the early part of your publishing career, you're going to find yourself having something rejected. And I always like to raise that first, because I think that what we have to do is to accept that that's a fact of life. And just get used to it quite quickly, so that we're not letting the idea of rejection constrain us. Most successful authors, right down to people who've now got several brilliant books in print and stuff like that, have been rejected at some point in the past. But one of the things about rejection is that it comes with feedback, and it enables you to move on. And I've certainly had plenty of stuff rejected in the past, and then had to have a rethink about how I'm going to deal with that.
Yeah, I think it's always challenging for nurses. I know when I started in the academic world, that was always a bit of a shock for me. Someone would send something back with comments all over it, or saying, no, this is not good enough. But it's about making something stronger and better in the long run. And if you approach it from that point of view, it just strengthens your work, and you learn. The more times you go through that process, you learn and get better at it. So it's really useful, I think. So,
and nothing that you ever write is ever wasted, even if it's rejected the first time around, because it's always the beginning of something that can be recreated for other purposes, if you like, really. So it's never wasted from that point of view. It's
definitely.
well worth it.
Yeah.
Okay, so Stephen King says, if you don't have time to read, you don't have the time or the tools to write. Simple as that. So obviously what this is alluding to is that one of the most important aspects of good writing is about reading. And that, the broader that reading is, the better off that you're going to be from that perspective. Because any reading people who read are generally people who think, but that they have ideas and thoughts that are based on consideration of a wide range of reading from that point of view. I'm just going to move on to the next slide, where William Faulkner talks about reading everything. Just read everything, trash, classics, good and bad, and see how they do it. Just like a carpenter that works as an apprentice and studies the master, read. And I think that the whole notion of even just reading, good, interesting fiction at bedtime, or when you're on the beach, if that's what you choose to do, is actually quite good for your writing practice. And I don't know if you do this with your students, Paul, but I actually encourage them to think about reading good quality novels partly as a way of relaxing, but also learning about how a good sentence can be strung together from that point of view.
Yeah, I don't do that, but that's a good hint. I think I might start doing that. That sounds like a good idea.
Here's some examples of some stuff that I've read over the last couple of years. Okay, Harry Potter, I've read all of them. I was absolutely mesmerised by the Philosopher's Stone, the first book that she brought out, because the writing's so engaging and it's so different and enlivening. And that the reading something like that can really sort of like get your imagination going about what might be possible. The other three books that I put up there are examples of things that are not necessarily the kind of things that you would expect to have an impact on the way that you write, but all through, or even the way that you think, but all three of these have. Justine Garder's Sophie's World is a novel but it's based on the idea of philosophy, what it is. So it's a story about a young girl in Norway, I think, who meets a philosopher, and it's about how she's taught about philosophy, but it's a very engaging read from that point of view. And it was recommended to me by my tutor when I first started my master's degree as a way of getting my head around some of the philosophical idea I might need to study at master's level. So that was a pretty amazing book for me. The Simplicity of Dementia is actually a book that's written for carers of people with dementia, and I read it about 5 or 6 years ago because I really felt that my own understanding of dementia and how it affected people needed to go back to the beginning, and I found that a really engaging read because it was written for carers in a really sort of like intelligent way that wasn't in any way insulting to their intelligence. And then finally, The Little Old Lady Who Broke All the Rules is actually a Swedish novel, and it's about an elderly lady who behaves very badly in terms of her activity once she's moved into a residential home. And it's one of those novels that's very engaging, it's very funny, it's been translated from Swedish to English and all number of other languages. And I think this author has a second book out, and it's really about challenging people's attitudes towards older people. And I wanted to mention these books because I think that what we have to do is encourage people to be a bit more expansive in what they read. And you know, people who are studying master's degrees, for example, feel that they don't have time for fiction. But if you choose your fiction and the other things that you read besides academic books and journal articles, it's actually very good for the way that you think and the way that you write.
Yeah, it's interesting because I read a lot for work, and when I was studying, I was reading a lot too. And I sort of felt that because I stopped reading fiction and other books, and I think it's worth trying to keep that up. I think, and when you read something that's written very well, it seems very simple, but achieving that's a little bit more complicated than it seems. But that's the real magic, I think, of being able to write well. So. Now, we've only probably got about 10 minutes left, Julie, so do you want to move on to some of the other stuff and skip through some of that?
Okay, so just a few points here about knowing your audience. So when you've got to the stage where you start to write, it's really worth, right at the beginning, thinking about who you're writing for. And here's a couple of examples of 2 papers that were written by the same author, about roughly the same topic, but the one on the left was written for the Lancet, and the one on the right was written for the Nursing Standard, which is the weekly sort of like almost newsy stroke journal in the UK. And they're about the same topic. They're about nurse staffing and the difference that they make to patients and what's going on politically in nursing at the moment. But they're prime examples of how this author, who clearly can write very academically because her paper was accepted in the Lancet, which is very unusual for nursing papers, but she'd also written this very engaging piece for the average nurse in the Nursing Standard. And I think they illustrate beautifully the fact that knowing your audience makes a real difference. The Watson book that I was talking about, they talk about 4 rules for writing. So if you're going to write something that's going to be published, you want it to get it published by someone else, there are 4 things you need to do. Read the journal's guidelines. You would be gobsmacked at how many people submit work to the journal. Paul's experiencing that now as well, who clearly have not read the guidelines and haven't even put the references in the right kind of Harvard referencing from the journal. The next thing to do is set targets and give yourself word count. Tell yourself that this is what the target word count is and this is how you're going to move along. They also say seek criticism as you go along. It's really good to have other people read your work. And as I said earlier, treat rejection as the beginning of the next submission. Expect it to happen and expect it to have an impact on the way that you think. Sometimes the most difficult part's getting started, and sometimes that's just a matter of sitting down and saying, you know, I'm not going to say to myself that I haven't got time to do that. I'm actually going to set some time aside just to do that, so that I can actually get started. Give yourself deadlines. Okay, sometimes you're going to miss them, but if you give a deadline for something to do something by, you're actually going to meet it. And I think what we might do, Paul, is actually just finish with a bit of a discussion about this slide, if that's okay.
Yeah, that sounds good.
It's a bit of an idea about what journal articles look like, and what it's worth thinking about when you're setting out a journal article for the first time. So on the left-hand side of the slide, then we're looking really at research-orientated articles, and on the right-hand side, this is more about reviews. So a title, that can be a movable feast as you go along, but thinking about eventually having a title that really says to the reader or somebody that might be searching for your article, this is what this article will be about. So avoiding being clever, but being fairly concise, but fairly clear about what's contained within your paper is important. Most journals will ask for an abstract, an introduction, and a background. And then you come to the point where, you know, if you've got a study here or if you've got a review, if you've got a research study, then you'll need to work your way through methods, findings, conclusions. That's the standard approach to that. If you're talking about a literature review, then you'll be working your way through the themes that have come out of your literature review and then through to conclusions. And those are the two main approaches. And an opinion article actually really works a little bit like a review, that you'll work your way through some themes, using the literature to back those up. And we also need to think about things like acknowledgement, other people's contributions, references, and figures of tables from that point of view. And that's the general article about how, general architecture of how journal articles actually work. I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that, Paul.
Yeah, I guess the most common thing I see when people write for a journal article, and I do the exact same thing, even though I know I try not to, is you sort of assume, because you've gone through that journey, and it sort of goes back to what we spoke about before, is that you've gone through that journey and a whole range of things have become normalized for you. But when you're writing, you need to try and explain those and identify those for the reader, because they haven't gone on that journey with you. You're describing that journey and you're outlining the processes, which partly sort of become something that you don't, you know, really think about or talk about overtly, I guess. And that's probably one of the biggest areas that I struggle with when I write an article is just all that stuff that I'm assuming and I know already that I forget to say clearly, and I think that's why it's really important to, once you write something, is have someone else or a number of other people read it and go through you know, with you, give you some feedback, use that information to you know, strengthen your article and make it a better reading in the long run, if that makes sense.
And that whole thing about getting feedback is really important. There's a slide a bit further down that talks about choosing carefully the people that you choose to get feedback from. You can get feedback from someone you know is going to be really positive about your work, or you can choose to find people who are going to be constructively critical about your work. And the second of those are actually the best people to try and find, a mentor, if you like, or a critical friend who's actually going to be a really critical friend, and not just say, oh yeah, I think that's really nice and I'm really happy to read that, just because they don't want to upset people. You want to find people who are actually going to give you that very strong critical feedback.
Yeah, and when you submit it to the you know, if you're submitting to a journal like the International Journal of Orthopaedic and Trauma Nursing, you'll you know, that submission I've got to try and control my dog. Sorry. That submission gets sent off to peers who will review that and give you feedback, and the editor will also provide feedback as well. So you can take that on board and strengthen, rewrite the article, revise the article, and strengthen it for next time as well. So.
I might just finish briefly with just talking about this slide, if that's okay, just for a few seconds.
Yeah.
This highlights from a journal perspective what's important, and what it shows is that in the years after publication, which is the bottom line, certain types of journal papers go through a particular process of being, if you like, cited. So this is the citation rates for different types of articles in different journals. So if you publish what the green line is about articles, and by that this means research publications that are talking about research. So they have a bit of a peak of being cited in other papers for about 2 years, but never really sort of like never really gets too high, and then that's depletes slowly over the following 20 years, if you like, really. And the idea of notes, which are seen as being discussions about particular cases, again, pretty high peak, but then drops off quite quickly. What's interesting is when you publish a review of the literature, if you like, then what tends to happen is that it builds up quite quickly to quite a high peak of being cited, that tails off really, really slowly. And that's the reason that as a journal editor, I really like people to do systematic reviews and send them in for publication, because as a journal editor, what I'm interested in is your work getting out into other areas. And so a review of the literature is actually going to hang around for a very long time. So that's good for me as a journal editor, but it's also good for you as somebody who wants to publish, particularly if you're interested in the way in which your CV works from that point of view. So I think that's quite an important point to make, is that good journal articles aren't always about research papers, they're about other things besides that, and that literature reviews are a really cool thing to be thinking about doing.
So, I think that's important. So, if you want to publish in the journal, then it's not just about having a research project. You don't have to, have some formalised research project. You've got ethics approval. It can be about different levels of study and opinion pieces and reviews, and there's a whole range of possibilities, which I think is important for, that's the sort of message I guess we want to get across. So, and I think for nurses, some nurses really struggle to, sit down and read a whole, long research paper. Whereas, if there's a review or something that you can publish, people do appreciate that sort of summarising the evidence out there and presenting it in a very clear and concise manner. So that can be a really useful type of publication as well.
Exactly. So there you go. That's a little bit of trying to motivate people about getting themselves on the writing trail.
Just do it.
Just do it.
Sounds good.
I think that's Nike's slogan these days, isn't it? Just do it.
Yeah.
Have a think about what you're going to write about, who you're going to write it for, and you'll be there, or at least part of the way there.
Yeah. And think about what you're doing and what you've done, because trying to get that concept in your head that everyone's got something that they that's worth writing about and worth sharing is a really important point, I guess. Has anyone got any questions or comments about that? You can type them in the bottom left hand corner of the screen. I know we'll be talking this similar sort of information and topic at the conference as well, so you'll have an opportunity there to ask questions in person and catch up with Julie as well in some of the breaks.
If you want specific help or advice, you know, I'm always happy to talk to people about any publication that they're thinking about or planning, or even partway through writing, or even finished and haven't quite decided what to do with it yet. So I'm very happy to chat with people, especially if there's caffeine while involved in the chat as well. It's always a good thing to do.
Definitely.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. When you more, I'm one of these people that finds that writing with others is very motivating. And if you're the kind of person that is a team player, then it does make it a lot easier for you if you work as part of a duo or a team, doesn't it?
Sometimes it's difficult if you, especially on your own, you've gone through this project and it's been a big project, and you know it's been a lot of hard work, and you get to the end and you're just like, oh, you know, we've achieved some good things. You know, I want to have a rest now. But trying to make yourself, you know, go the next step and talk about it and share it is it's almost as important as the change that you've been able to achieve, I guess.
And the other
so
thing
if you can do that as part of the group, it's good.
Yeah. Nurses don't always believe in themselves either, do they? So you've done a piece of work and you think, oh, nobody's going to be interested in hearing about that. But actually having a team approach to getting it published actually makes you believe that it's more, you know, people are actually going to be interested in hearing about it as well.
Yep, definitely. Definitely, that sounds good, Stephen. We'll catch up with Julie at the conference, so
yeah,
can talk about that there.
No chance of getting away without it now, Stephen. I'm on your case.
And so, for anyone listening to the presentation, ANZONA does have a number of people who have some experience in publishing, and they're more than happy to talk to you about if you have any ideas, or like Julie said, you've already started writing and you want someone to have a look at the writing and work out where the most best place to publish it is. So there's a number of people that are able to do that. So you can just contact us through the website or email myself as well. So I'm more than happy to talk to people or put you onto someone who will be able to help you out. So I'm just adding my email address as we speak, so that you can use that email to contact me as well. Any other questions, guys? Oh, and then it's Julie's. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much, Julie, for joining us at, what is it, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning?
That's 7:15 in the UK now.
What time is it, sorry?
11:15 in the morning.
Oh, 11:15. There we go.
You guys can go and relax. I've got the rest of the day of work ahead of me.
Well, that sounds good. All right. Well, I appreciate your time, and thank you to everyone for coming along as well.
Yeah, thanks so much. Take care.